Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. In the days since the election, in some sections it's become quite fashionable, I think, to denounce Smith. Of course, some started that quite early. My fellow member of the Smith Commission, Mr Swinney, started his denunciation about 15 minutes after the report was released. But for my own erstwhile colleagues, some of them, it took a little longer before they jumped on that bandwagon. So I want to start by repaying tribute to the work of the Smith Commission and all the members of that commission, because the truth is the Smith Commission was given what many believe to be an absolutely impossible job, and in my view made a remarkably good fist of what they were asked to do. We were asked to deal with some extremely complex issues. We were asked to deal with it on a timescale which was very truncated, with this deadline of St Andrew's Day, so we had only around 10 weeks to do the work. The complexity of the issues that we were dealing with, I think, is one reason which comes through into the committee's report, that there were some things which the Commission did agree amongst ourselves we were not going to be able to resolve, and therefore they did have to be left for, usually, negotiation and discussion between the two governments, Scottish and UK government. And some reference has been made to some of those already. The fiscal arrangements, of course, the fiscal framework is one, and the detail of the borrowing regime. So I don't think we need to make any apology for the fact that those are elements of the relationship between the two administrations and parliaments which have to be worked out over time. There is not a devolved democratic structure, be it federal or otherwise, in the world, I think, which doesn't have some complexity within those fiscal frameworks and arrangements for fiscal transfer and borrowing. It was a process, too, in which a compromise was made, and you know, I was cheeky there with the Deputy First Minister about his reaction on the day the Smith Commission was published. But in all fairness to him and to Ms Fabiani, they made very clear from the start that they were not going to change their view that a devolved settlement wouldn't go far enough for them. But they were prepared, and indeed did, to take part in that process, and they compromised, and everyone on Smith, I think, did compromise. So we should, I think, take the chance to pay some tribute to that again. But of course, the next difficult task was the draft legislation. And I know that drafting legislation is not easy, but frankly, I simply have to agree with the Deputy First Minister that examination of the draft legislation does rather say that some of it does not, as he puts it, reflect both the spirit and the substance of what was agreed at Smith. And I want very quickly just to add my voice to some of the points which the committee have made, because I think the committee have done a remarkably clear-sighted job of what they were required to do by looking at the degree to which the draft legislation does reflect the agreement and where it does not. So in a number of areas I just want to put in, as it were, my tuppence worth. On taxation, it was very clear in Smith that the agreement was that income tax was a shared tax, that a great deal of responsibility would be devolved, but that it would continue to be a shared tax. And that is why, for example, tax allowances were not devolved as part or recommended for devolution. And I just say gently that I think the use of the income tax devolution to try and justify what's called English votes for English laws has been one of the more reprehensible misuses of Smith since then. But I also want to say on a very particular point that that did also involve considerable debate as to whether it would be possible to set a zero rate in order to remove some taxpayers, or make some taxpayers not liable for tax at all. And I just want to say that I am very, very clear that the Smith Agreement was that a zero rate should be possible, and so the legislation should reflect that. On welfare, I am absolutely clear that when we look at, for example, the £2.5 billion of welfare benefits which are to be devolved, what was intended was complete devolution of both those resources and the responsibility. In other words, if we look at one of them, carers allowance, that would mean that a Scottish Government could simply take this money, get rid of carers allowance altogether and use the money for something else. I don't think they would be likely to do that, but any idea that it means some control over a continuing carers allowance is, from my point of view, simply incorrect. It is also the case that it was absolutely the intention that this Parliament ought to be able to create new benefits in devolved areas and not for a temporary period. And just in closing, I do want to say that on this side of the House, as Jackie Baillie has said, we're not close to the idea of going beyond Smith, and in particular in the area of housing benefit, we would like to continue to argue for that, because that is a case we think has great merit, and although we didn't win it in Smith, we will continue to make it. Not least because, and this is important, the arrangements in Smith were supposed to ensure that this Parliament would be able to abolish the bedroom tax, but they do so in a rather complicated and convoluted way. The simplest way to achieve that would be to devolve housing benefit, and that's just one reason why we will continue to argue for that as the process continues.
Many thanks.